You've heard of the Tower of London, haven't you? That grand, ancient fortress with its winding stone corridors and history heavier than the air itself. But what if I told you it's not just a museum of royal jewels and executions, it's a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Built in the 11th century, it's been a prison, a treasury, a palace, yes, even a zoo. But there's something about its shadowy corridors and echoing halls that makes the air feel just a little too still, like the walls are holding their breath. But it's not just the past that lingers here. Some say the tower still whispers the names of those who were silenced. And in the stillness of the night, when the echoes of history are loudest, you can hear them just barely, just enough to make your spine tingle. You might have read about the tower in books or seen it in films, but there's something different about being here in person. The silence is thick, the air feels heavy, and every corner seems to hold a secret that's been waiting a long time to be told. So, as we begin our journey through these cursed chambers, remember this: the tower isn't just a place, it's a living, breathing monument to the past. And sometimes, the past doesn't let go so easily. You know, the Tower of London wasn't always a prison. In the 11th century, it was a fortress, a symbol of Norman power, built by William the Conqueror himself. Imagine the clang of iron, the smell of damp stone, and the sound of horses' hooves echoing through its walls. But it quickly became more than a military stronghold. By the 12th century, it was a place where the crown stored its most valuable treasures, crowns, jewels, and even the crown jewels themselves. It was a vault of power, and power, my dear, has a way of corrupting. Over the centuries, the tower became a place of execution, imprisonment, and even torture. It housed the infamous Tower of Liberties, a dark, damp prison where the accused were held without trial. Some say the air still carries the whispers of those who were never freed. But it wasn't just kings and criminals who left their mark. The tower also held women, queens, concubines, and even those accused of treason. Some, like Anne Boleyn, were betrayed and executed. Others, like Lady Jane Grey, were imprisoned and later executed. Each story adds a layer to the tower's haunted legacy. And then there's the crown jewels, those glittering treasures that have been kept in the tower for centuries. Some believe they're cursed, that their history of violence and betrayal has left a mark on the very stones themselves. So, as we move forward, I wonder, what secrets still lie buried in these ancient stones? What voices still echo through these halls, waiting to be heard? Let's find out. You see, it wasn't just the bells that echoed through the tower. There was a peculiar hum, like the low growl of a beast beneath the stone, that started just before dawn. It wasn't sound so much as a feeling, a vibration in the bones. The keepers noticed it first, a cold draft that would rise through the floorboard at odd hours, even when the great halls were empty. It was as if the castle itself was breathing, drawing in the air with a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. Then came the whispers, not the kind you hear in a crowded room, but something deeper, like the castle was speaking in a language only the stones could understand. It was never loud, just persistent, and it never stopped. The keepers began to fear the silence. When the bells fell silent and the wind died, the tower would hold its breath. And in that stillness, something watched, not from the shadows, but from within the walls themselves. You remember the legend of the White Lady, but what about the night she vanished? The tower was quiet, but the wind howled like a ghost in the stone corridors, and the moonlight seemed to flicker with something unseen. One evening in the 16th century, a young woman named Lady Eleanor was last seen in the White Tower. Her maid reported hearing a scream, but when they arrived, the chamber was locked from the inside, and the door was marked with a single drop of blood. The next morning, Eleanor was found in the chapel, her body cold and lifeless, but her lips were sealed in a silent scream, as if she had been trying to warn someone of the curse that now bound the tower. No one ever discovered what happened to her, but the curse of the White Lady has endured, haunting the halls of the tower for centuries, whispering her tale to those who dare to listen. I remember the first time I heard about the White Lady of the Tower. A woman in her 70s, with a mind like a well of secrets, told me she saw her in the mirror one stormy night. The reflection was clear, the face pale, and the eyes like two dead stars. She said the woman stood there, silent, for what felt like an hour. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. No one else saw her, but the woman swore she heard her voice whispering her name in the dark. There's also the story of the man who claimed to see the ghost of a child in the dungeons. He said it was a boy, no older than 6, with wide eyes and a sad smile, standing at the edge of a cell. He never saw the child again after that night. One old guard told me he saw a shadowy figure moving through the gallery at midnight. He ran, but the figure never chased him. It simply faded into the walls, as if it had never been there at all. These are just a few of the many accounts, each one more unsettling than the last. You see, the tower doesn't just hold history. It holds stories, secrets, and the echoes of those who once called it home. We began our investigation with the old records, dusty and brittle, like the pages of a ghost diary. The tower's archives held whispers of a hidden chamber, a place where time seems to fold in on itself. The first clue was a faded sketch, drawn in the 17th century, of a secret door behind the tapestry in the White Tower. It looked like a child's doodle, but there was something hauntingly precise about the lines. We found the door, but it had no handle, only a small, rusted keyhole. When we tried the key from the sketch, it turned with a sound like a sigh, and the door groaned open as if exhaling its secrets. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of old books, their spines cracked and worn. But what caught our attention was a single, unmarked book, open to a page that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. As we leaned in, the book's page revealed a name, Queen Anne of Denmark, alongside a strange symbol. It was a mark I'd seen before in the records of a long-dead alchemist. But why would a queen be connected to an alchemist in a secret chamber? You know, there's one thing that has always puzzled the historians, the ghost hunters, and even the locals who live near the tower today. No one can explain it, not even the people who have walked those halls for generations. It's not the bloodstains, not the bodies, not even the whispers in the stone. It's something far more subtle, something that has slipped through the cracks of time like a ghost itself. The note only says one thing: the truth is not in the walls, but in the silence between them. And that silence, that eerie, unbroken silence, has remained with us ever since. So, what do you think? Is it a trick of the mind? Or is there something still waiting in the tower, something that refuses to be spoken, but refuses to be forgotten? You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That the tower's stones hold more than just history, they hold the echoes of 1,000 souls trapped between the cracks of time. Some say the ghost of Anne Boleyn still walks the halls, her sorrow a constant hum in the wind. Others believe it's the spirit of a child, crying in the silence of the White Tower. And then there are the theories like the idea that the tower holds the souls of the dead because they were never allowed to leave. Some say they're waiting for the day the tower falls. But perhaps the most chilling legend is this: that the tower is not just haunted, but cursed. That it was built on ground that was once sacred, and that its walls are sealed with a price paid in blood. You know, even now, the tower's secrets refuse to stay buried. Some say the stones still hum with the voices of the past, whispering names we've never learned. The crown jewels are safe, the prisoners are gone, but the silence that lingers is heavier than any chain. What if the tower isn't just haunted, it's remembering? Some say the tower doesn't just hold ghosts, it holds the weight of history, the sorrow of 1,000 silent souls. And they're still waiting to be heard. So the next time you pass by the tower, maybe you'll listen a little harder. The stones might just be waiting for you to hear what they've been saying all along. As the echoes of the past fade into silence, I wonder what secrets still linger in the shadows of the tower's ancient walls. Have you ever felt the weight of history pressing down on you like a heavy blanket? Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones we never get to hear, like the whispers of the forgotten, still waiting to be understood. Stay with me, dear listener. The next story is just a whisper away, and it's waiting for you in the dark. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Until then, let the silence speak, and remember, the past is never truly gone. You've heard of the East Wing Hotel, haven't you? The place that used to sit on the edge of town, like a forgotten ghost in the woods. You know, the one with the broken clock tower and a front door that never quite closed. It wasn't always a hotel. Back in the 1920s, it was a grand hotel, full of laughter and life. The kind of place where people would come for a weekend, and never leave the same. But something changed, and the laughter faded. Now, it's just a shell, a place that whispers to those who wander too close. Some say the walls still remember the laughter, the music, and the secrets that were never told. But there's more to the story than just ghosts. The East Wing has a reputation, a history that lingers in the air like perfume from a long-dead lover. You've heard the tales, but have you ever wondered what really happened there? So, if you're looking for a story that lingers in the mind, that builds slowly, like the hush before a storm, then you're in the right place. Let's step inside the East Wing Hotel and see what lies in the shadows. You know, the East Wing Hotel wasn't always a place of shadows and silence. Back in the 1920s, it was a beacon of luxury, a place where the rich and famous came to escape the noise of the world. It was built by a man named Elias Whitmore, a visionary with a heart full of dreams and a pocket full of secrets. He promised the world a place where time would pause and money would flow. One of the most infamous figures to ever walk its halls was a woman named Clara Voss, a socialite with a reputation for both charm and cunning. She was said to have orchestrated more than one scandal from those lavish rooms. And then there was the tragedy: Elias Whitmore's daughter, Lily, who died under mysterious circumstances in the East Wing's private suite. Her story, like the hotel itself, was never fully told. The East Wing Hotel was more than just a building. It was a stage for love, betrayal, and loss. And when the lights went out, the echoes of its past refused to fade. You remember the first time the lights flickered in the East Wing? It was just a little dim, like the bulb had aged a few decades. But the way it dipped, almost like a sigh, made your skin prickle. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not even clear. Just a murmur at the edge of your hearing, like someone was talking to themselves in the next room. You turned, but there was no one there. One night, the elevator stopped on the 4th floor. No one was there. You heard the hum of the motor, then silence. You waited, and when you finally pressed the button, it didn't respond. Not at all. And then there were the voices. Not all at once, but just one calling your name. You'd answer, and the room would go quiet. But the next night, it was someone else's name. And the next, no one's at all. You remember the sound of the elevator, the soft hum of steel and gears, the way it would groan as it climbed the old building. But on the night of the 14th, it stopped just short of the East Wing, as if it knew something was waiting up there. The maintenance man, Mr. Delaney, said he heard a voice, quiet but insistent, calling from the top floor. He said it was like a child, but the voice didn't belong to any child in the building. It just stopped. The voice kept coming, every night, for weeks. Some said it was a ghost. Others said it was the building itself, remembering the lives that once filled its halls. But no one ever saw the source, just the sound of a child calling from the East Wing. And then, one night, the voice stopped. But the elevator started moving again on its own, climbing higher than it ever had before. And when it stopped, the doors opened to a room that hadn't been used in decades. No one has gone up there since. But sometimes, on quiet nights, you can still hear the voice, faint but clear, calling from the East Wing, where the past is never truly gone. I remember the night I first saw the hotel's ghost. It was just after midnight, and the halls were so still you could hear your own heartbeat. The elevator doors opened to a silence so thick, it felt like the building was holding its breath. I wasn't alone, though I didn't know it then. A woman in a black coat stood in the doorway, her silhouette trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her face was obscured, but her eyes were wide with something I can't explain. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me like she was waiting for something. I turned to leave, but the doors had vanished, and the walls were closing in like a living thing. I ran until I hit the lobby, where the front desk was empty, and the clock on the wall had stopped at 12:07. The only sound was the echo of my own breath, and the feeling that I had never left the hotel at all. Since then, I've seen others too, people who say they saw the same woman, or heard whispers in the stairwell. Some say she's a lost maid, others say she's a ghost who never left. We started with the basics: logs, photographs, and a little-known ledger from the 1920s. The hotel had been sealed off for decades, but the staff at the local diner still remembered the place like a ghost they'd outgrown. The first clue was a name, Alina Voss. She was a guest in 1947, the year the East Wing vanished. No one remembered her, but the diner owner whispered that she'd been hollowed by the hotel, like the walls had taken her inside. The next day, we found a door half hidden behind a curtain in the basement. It was locked, but the key was there, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, as if waiting for someone to find it. When we opened it, the air inside was thick, almost wet, like it had been trapped for years. There was a faint, metallic scent, like old blood, and a whisper, just one word, echoed in the dark: help. We left it locked, but not before taking a single photograph. The camera didn't capture the whisper, but it did capture something else, something that made the hairs on our necks stand up, like the hotel was watching us. The East Wing wasn't just empty, it was waiting, and it had a name, and it had a story, one we were only beginning to understand. You ever notice how some details just linger, like the one thing that doesn't fit? The thing no one ever explains. It's not the ghosts or the whispers. It's the one thing that's always there, but never explained. Like the door that only opens when the moon is full. That's the one thing the staff never talk about. The one detail that's always there, but never explained. Like a secret they're too afraid to share. You think you're ready for the stories. But sometimes, the real horror isn't the ghosts. It's the silence between the whispers. And that, my dear friends, is the one detail that has never been explained. The one thing that lingers, even when the lights go out. You've heard the stories, but some folks swear the East Wing isn't just haunted, it's cursed. They say the walls bleed when the moon's full, and the ghosts don't just wander, they wait. One local legend claims the hotel's original owner, a reclusive inventor, built the East Wing to trap his own creations, automatons that went rogue. He never left, and they never stopped chasing him. Others say the East Wing is the last place a young woman vanished in 1947. She was last seen arguing with a man in the lobby, and he vanished too. No one ever found their bodies. Some say the ghosts are just lonely souls trapped by the hotel's history. They can't move on, and they can't leave, so they stay, whispering in the dark, hoping someone will listen. You might think it's just old tales, but if you ever find yourself in the East Wing after dark, you'll hear them voices, laughter, footsteps. And if you're not careful, they'll find you. So many years have passed since the East Wing Hotel's last guest left, yet the mystery still lingers, like the faint hum of a forgotten radio. No one knows exactly what happened in that room, and no one wants to ask. The police closed the case, but the truth never really closed. It just waited, like a ghost in the walls, for someone to remember to look. Even now, people say they hear whispers in the hallway, and the echo of a door creaking shut when no one's there. It's not just a story anymore, it's a presence. So what did happen in that room? Did she run away, or did something else take her? And why does the East Wing still feel like it's waiting for someone to come back? That's the question no one has an answer to. And maybe that's why the hotel still stands, not as a place to stay, but as a place to remember. You ever notice how the best stories aren't the ones that end with a scream, but the ones that linger in your mind like a half-remembered dream? The East Wing Hotel's silence is the most unsettling sound of all. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Sometimes, the most haunted places aren't the ones with ghosts, they're the ones that make you question if you're the one who's been changed. The East Wing Hotel isn't just haunted, it's a keeper of secrets, and it doesn't let go easily. As you leave, the silence feels heavier, like the place is watching you and waiting for you to return. So, if you ever find yourself standing in the East Wing Hotel's shadow, listen closely. Sometimes, the quietest places speak the loudest. You've heard the name, but have you ever stood in the shadow of the Whaley House? It's not just a house, it's a living memory. A place where the air feels heavier, like the past is holding its breath. Built in 1857, this house has stood as a silent witness to centuries of secrets. It's not just haunted, it's a repository of sorrow, a place where the walls remember every whispered prayer and every unspoken regret. So, you ever heard of a house that started as a family home, then became a place of terror? The Whaley House began in 1857 when the Whaley family, a well-respected family in the town of San Luis Obispo, built this grand home with their own hands. The Whaleys were a proud family: John, his wife Eliza, and their 5 children. They were known for their kindness and hospitality, often hosting town gatherings and offering shelter to those in need. In 1864, tragedy struck. John Whaley died suddenly in his sleep, and the family was left in shock. Eliza, grieving and overwhelmed, began to act strangely, sleepwalking, speaking to the dead, and leaving the house in the middle of the night. The town grew suspicious. Some believed Eliza was cursed, others thought she was mad. But the real mystery began when the family's youngest daughter, Clara, vanished without a trace, leaving only her shoes by the front door. What happened to Clara? Was she taken, or did she leave of her own will? The Whaley House became a place of fear, and the mystery of Clara's disappearance would haunt the house for generations to come. You know how sometimes the first strange thing is just a feeling, like the air has shifted and you can't quite place why? That's what happened here. The first signs were subtle, almost like the house was holding its breath. The owners began to notice things that didn't make sense. Objects moved when no one was around, doors slammed shut on their own, and the temperature would drop so fast it felt like the house itself was exhaling. Then came the smell. Not just any smell, something that clung to the skin, like the house had breathed it in and now it was inside you. It wasn't unpleasant, but it made the hairs on your neck stand up. The first real sign was a child's toy left in the hallway, untouched, as if waiting for someone to find it. It was just a doll, but it was as if the house had placed it there to remind them they weren't alone. They tried to laugh it off, to pretend it was just the house settling, but the unease grew. The house wasn't just wrong, it was watching. And it was waiting. You know, some folks say the Whaley House wasn't built with bricks and mortar, but with secrets and sorrow. And one night, those secrets bled into the walls. In 1852, a young woman named Clara Whaley vanished without a trace. Her room was locked from the inside, and the door was found slightly ajar, as if someone had been there and then left in a hurry. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. No one could find a clue, no fingerprints, no sign of struggle, just a room that had been occupied and then left empty. Some say Clara's spirit still lingers, waiting for the right moment to step into the light and tell her story. But the house has a way of keeping its own secrets, and that's why we still come back. Not just for the stories, but for the feeling that the house is still waiting for someone to listen. I remember the first time I heard about the Whaley house, it was from a neighbor who said, "Don't go there after dark, those walls breathe." One night, a young couple claimed they saw a woman in a white dress standing at the end of the hallway just before they turned back to leave. Another witness swore she heard a child's laughter echoing from the basement, but when she went to check, there was no one there. One man said he saw the ghost of a man in a top hat and tails standing in the doorway, watching him with a knowing look. And then there was the woman who said she saw the same woman in the white dress, but with blood on her hands like she'd just come from a crime. These accounts are strange, but they all point to one thing: the Whaley house has a memory that refuses to be forgotten. The investigators started with the basics, checking locks, interviewing the locals, and digging through old records. But the more they learned, the more the Whaley house seemed to breathe on its own, like it was waiting for them. They found a journal from the 1880s, written in a shaky hand, describing strange noises at night and a woman in a white dress who never left her room. The writer kept writing, like they were trying to outrun the thing they'd seen. They discovered a sealed-off room beneath the house, filled with old furniture and a single, rusted mirror. The mirror didn't reflect anything, just an empty space, as if the room had never existed. The more they uncovered, the more the house seemed to resist them. Doors would slam shut, lights would flicker, and the air would grow colder, like the house itself was trying to stop them from finding the truth. They left the house with more questions than answers, and a feeling that they'd only scratched the surface. The Whaley house wasn't just haunted, it was watching. You ever wonder what makes a house feel like it's holding its breath? The Whaley house isn't just haunted, it's got a secret it won't let go of. One detail, so small it's been overlooked, has stayed with the house like a ghost in the wallpaper. No one can say what it is, only that it's there. The house doesn't need to explain itself. It just needs to remember. And sometimes, remembering is more terrifying than forgetting. So next time you pass a house that feels too quiet, maybe you'll listen. Sometimes, the silence is the story that's still being told. You know, some folks say the Whaley house isn't haunted by ghosts at all, it's cursed by the blood of the people who lived there. They whisper that the family's sins bled into the walls, and the house remembers. Others believe the house is just a magnet for tragedy, like a dark version of a bad omen. You know, the kind of place that seems to draw in people who are already broken. There's even a theory that the house is cursed by the land itself, like the ground has a memory of the violence and death that happened there, and it won't let go. But don't take it too seriously, dear. After all, we all know a little mystery makes the world feel more interesting and a little scarier. You know, sometimes the worst part of a mystery isn't the crime itself, but the silence that follows. The Whaley house has a lot of voices, but none of them speak of what happened to those last few souls. What really happened in that last room? No one can say. The police said it was an accident, but the Whaley family didn't believe it. They believed the house had something to do with it, and they weren't wrong. But the truth, it's still buried under layers of dust, and no one's been brave enough to dig it up. And now, decades later, the house still stands. It's a relic of a bygone era, a place where time seems to stand still. Some say it's haunted. Others say it's just waiting for someone to ask the right questions. So, what do you think? Was it a tragic accident, or did the house finally get what it wanted? The answer, like the house itself, is still waiting in the dark. You've heard the whispers of the Whaley house, but have you ever wondered what it's like to walk through its halls with your eyes closed? A silence so thick, it feels like the walls are holding their breath. Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't the ones that end in terror, but the ones that linger in your mind long after the lights go out. What if the house isn't trying to scare you, it's trying to remember you? And as you leave, the house seems to exhale just for a moment. You feel it in your bones. The Whaley house isn't just haunted, it's alive, and it's waiting for more stories. But remember, the house doesn't just remember the past, it remembers you. So, keep your head up, and your heart open. There's more to come. You ever heard of a place where the air feels thick with secrets, and the silence is louder than any sound? This is the Hangman Inn, a crumbling relic tucked into the fog-draped hills of Vermont. Built in the 1800s, it was once a haven for travelers until the owner, a man with a temper and a taste for justice, hung 3 men for crimes he claimed were worse than murder. You know, the first time I heard the name Hangman Inn, I thought it was a joke. But no, it's real. A place where the air was thick with secrets, and the stories were as heavy as the old wooden beams. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It was built in the 1820s by a man named Elias Thorne, a wealthy businessman with a taste for the macabre. He called it a sanctuary for the soul and a place to rest the lost. Together, they built the inn not just as a place to stay, but as a place to hide. Some say they used it to imprison runaway slaves and the mentally ill. Others say they used it for darker purposes. And then came the rumors. The hangman wasn't just a symbol, it was a warning, a sign that the inn had a soul of its own, and that it wasn't ready to let go. You know how sometimes the first crack in the ice is the loudest? Well, that's what it was here. A faint, almost musical hum, like a tuning fork struck in the attic. It wasn't loud, but it was there, and it didn't go away. The caretaker, an old man named Elmer, swore it was the wind. But the wind didn't hum. It didn't hum in the shape of a choir, and it didn't hum in the dead of night when the house was silent. It just stayed. Then came the whispers. Not words, but a sort of vibration in the air, like someone was singing in a language that only the walls could understand. You could feel it in your bones, like the house itself was trying to tell you something. Elmer started hearing it too. He'd been here for decades, but this was different. It wasn't the house talking, it was something inside the house, something that had been waiting for someone to listen. And then, just before the first real ghost showed itself, the house began to change. The hum grew louder, the whispers turned into a melody, and somehow the air felt heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. One night, the inn's caretaker found the piano keys missing, and the ghostly choir fell silent. No one could explain how they vanished, or why the air turned colder in that room. The caretaker tried to replace the keys, but the moment his hand touched the first one, a cold breath brushed his neck, and the room filled with a sound like 1,000 children weeping. The last time the choir was heard was the night the caretaker vanished, and the inn was left empty, with only the echo of children's voices lingering in the walls. Now, when the wind howls through the trees, some say you can still hear them, just a whisper, a song, a sigh, like they're waiting for someone to play the piano again. I've spoken to dozens of people who say they heard the choir, but none can agree on what they saw. One woman swore she saw a group of children, dressed in white, standing in the old ballroom like they were waiting for a performance. Another said it was men in dark suits, their heads bowed, singing in a language she didn't recognize. She told me she felt the music in her bones, like it was coming from inside her. One man claims he saw a woman in a red dress, her face pale and her eyes wide, standing at the foot of the stairs. She never moved, but she kept looking up, as if waiting for someone. There's even a local who says he's heard the choir from his own home on the night of the full moon. He told me he could feel the music in the air, like the walls themselves were vibrating. And then there's the nurse who said she heard the choir in the middle of the night, but when she went to check, there was no one there, just the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the empty hall. We started with the ledger, a faded leather-bound book with pages that crinkled like old parchment. The clerk who kept it said it was filled with the names of every guest who ever stayed here, and the names of those who never left. The names were alphabetical, but the dates didn't add up. Some entries had no dates, others had multiple dates. It was like the guests were staying for years, or maybe never at all. One name stood out, Eliza Whitmore. She was listed as staying from 1872 to 1875, but her final entry was marked with a red X. The clerk said she was the last one to leave, and she never returned. The more we looked, the more we found names that didn't match any known records. Some were children, some were soldiers, and a few had names that weren't even English. It was like the ledger was collecting ghosts. By the end of the day, we had more questions than answers. The ledger was like a diary of the inn, but it was also a map to something deeper, something that had been buried in the walls for over a century. You know, the thing that's always bugged me is the one detail that just doesn't fit. Every other part of the story lines up, but this one? It's like someone left a puzzle piece in the attic. It's the man in the photo. He's been in every account, every testimonial, every old-timey story about the hanged man in, but no one can say who he is or where he went. And here's the kicker, every time someone tries to find out more, they just disappear. No records, no witnesses, no leads. It's like the inn itself has a secret it won't tell. So here's my question. Dear listener, what do you think? Was he a ghost, or just a man who never made it out of the story? You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the hangman inn's ghosts are just mourners, they're choir boys, singing in a key that's never been written down. Some say the melody is a lullaby from the 1800s, a tune that used to play in the inn's parlor before the tragedies began. Others insist it's a hymn they never heard in any church. There's even a theory that the inn's owner, old Mrs. Lyle, used to sing to the children before they disappeared, that she knew something she never said. So when the new owners came in, they said they'd bring in a real choir, but the music they play now is just a silence that hums with something old, something waiting. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. A choir that never sang, and a song that never ended. You know, sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't about what happened but what never did. The Hanged Man Inn story is still being written, and we're all just pages in the middle of it. Every year, the townsfolk gather to mark the anniversary, but no one dares to speak of the missing girl. Her name is lost in time, but her ghost is not. She waits, just like the rest of them. We've searched the woods, the old cellars, the cellars beneath the cellars, but the truth is always just out of reach. Like the girl, it's been waiting for someone to listen. So, dear listener, what will you do with this story? Will you let it linger in the shadows, or will you step into the unknown and see what lies beyond the next bend in the path? The Hanged Man Inn is still standing, but the truth, it's still waiting for someone to find it. And until then, the choir will sing and the silence will speak. You ever notice how the quietest places often whisper the loudest? The Hanged Man Inn isn't just haunted, it's a place where the past won't let go. Sometimes, the ghosts aren't the ones who died, they're the ones who were never meant to leave. Stories like this don't just fade, they linger, like the echo of a song you've never heard but somehow know. So, as we turn the page, remember, the past is never truly buried, it just waits for the right moment to sing again. You've heard the tales of the Hanged Man Inn, haven't you? A place where the wind whispers secrets and the trees seem to lean in closer, like they're listening. It's nestled in the heart of a quiet town where time seems to stand still. The inn was built in the 1800s, a place of refuge and rest. But something shifted the moment the last hanged man's noose touched the ground. The air changed, and so did the stories that followed. The whispers in the wind are said to be a choir, a haunting melody that plays only when the moon is high and the stars are silent. It's a sound that lingers long after you've left and never quite fades. The Hanged Man Inn is more than just a place, it's a story that lingers in the bones of the earth and the memories of those who dared to step inside. And now, it's your turn to listen. You know, the Hanged Man Inn didn't start as a place of terror. It was once a quiet, respectable establishment, a place where travelers came to rest their weary bones and sip on warm, spiced cider. The original owner, a widower named Elias Granger, was a man of modest means but deep piety. He built the place with his own hands, and it was said he whispered prayers to the walls as he laid each plank. But things changed when a band of outlaws took refuge in the inn during a brutal winter. They were desperate, hungry, and the place became their temporary sanctuary until the snows melted and the law came knocking. Elias, in a moment of mercy, let them stay, but when the town's posse arrived, he was forced to choose his guests or his own peace of mind. He chose the law, and the outlaws were hanged in the town square. The tragedy left Elias heartbroken and haunted. He never built another place, and the inn fell into disrepair. But the echoes of those lost souls and the weight of his guilt stayed behind, whispering their sorrow into the walls. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You remember how the first thing you noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after a storm, but the kind that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Then came the sound, soft, like a whisper in the rafters, just enough to make your skin prickle and your heart skip a beat. It started with the cold, not the kind that comes with the winter storm, but the kind that creeps in at night, lingering in the corners of your room like it's been there all along. And then the voices so faint, so far away, like they're coming from the walls themselves, or maybe from the people who once lived here. You thought it was just the wind, or the old house settling, but deep down, you knew it was something else. Something that had been waiting for you. You've heard the whispers of the Hanged Man Inn. But what happened on that fateful night in 1943? A woman named Alina vanished without a trace, her last known location the upstairs room where the choir once sang. Neighbors say she was never the same after the fire. The inn had burned down years before, but she kept coming back, claiming she heard the choir in the walls, singing hymns in a language no one understood. The police found nothing but the doll, and a single locket with a faded photo of Alina and her daughter. The daughter never spoke of her mother again, only that she heard the choir in the night and that it sang her name. Now, if you're ever passing by the Hanged Man Inn, listen closely. You might hear the choir again, but this time it might be singing for you. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have heard that choir, but no one can say for sure what it sounds like. Some say it's a hymn, others say it's a dirge. One woman swore she could make out the words, but the moment she tried to write them down, the sound vanished. One man described the voices as coming from the rafters, like they're singing from above. He said the sound made his skin crawl, and that the air in the room grew colder the longer the choir sang. Another claimed the choir only sings on the night of the full moon, and that it stops the moment someone tries to follow the sound. One old man told me he tried to find the source, but the moment he stepped into the hallway, the voices faded and the air turned thick with silence. There's even a local who says he's heard the choir from his own home, but only when he's alone and the windows are closed. He said it's not just the sound, it's the way it feels, like the house is holding its breath. These accounts are more than just stories. They're fragments of something real, something that lingers in the air like the last note of a song. And that's what makes the hollow choir so unsettling. It's not just what you hear, but what it makes you feel. We began our investigation with a simple request, a list of all the names ever recorded in the ledger. What we found wasn't just a list, it was a graveyard of whispers, each name tied to a story of guilt, love, or betrayal. The first name on the list was Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who vanished in 1892 after a bitter love affair. The records hinted at a secret room beneath the inn, a place where emotions ran deeper than the walls. We found no evidence of the room, only a series of hand-carved initials in the wall, some still fresh, others worn to dust. It was as if the walls remembered the names, even when the people had long since faded. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the inn wasn't just haunted, it was holding onto secrets. Some of these names were still alive, and they had no idea their own stories were being whispered in the dark. It was clear the inn had become more than a place of shelter, it had become a keeper of memory, a witness to the past, and perhaps a judge of the present. You know, the thing that has always bugged me about the Hanged Man Inn is the one detail that no one ever talks about. It's like the story stops just before it gets good, and we're left with this lingering question. They say the choir was made of the souls of the hanged men, but no one ever explains where they went after the last hanging. It's like they vanished without a trace, and no one remembers why. You think it's just a ghost story? No, it's something more. The last hanging was in 1892, but the records don't mention that the man was ever found, just that he was hanged, and then nothing. So here's the thing, no one knows if he was ever there at all. Maybe the whole thing was a cover-up. Maybe the inn was never built on the site of a hanging. Maybe he never existed. But if that's true, then who is the one who still sings in the choir? And why does the inn still stand, even when the truth is buried deeper than the roots of the old oak tree out back? Some say the choir isn't just a memory, but a warning. They say if you hear the singing, you should never let the inn's doors close behind you. Old Mrs. Delaney claims she saw a child's hand peeking through the window one stormy night, holding a doll that looked exactly like the one she lost in the war. There are those who believe the choir is the souls of the hanged, trapped in a loop of their last moments, never able to move on. And then there are the ones who say the choir is just the wind, playing tricks on the ears of the lonely, the lost, and the ones who linger too long. But no one ever leaves the inn, not really. And the choir? It keeps singing, just a little louder every year. We've spent weeks unraveling the past, but one question remains: why? Why would a quiet inn become a place of such haunting silence? You can almost hear the unanswered question echoing through those empty halls. The local historian insists there was no murder, no betrayal, just a lonely man, a few bottles, and a decision he never lived to regret. But the woods know the truth, and they've been whispering it for decades. And still, no one has found the body. No one has seen the face of the man who vanished. The inn remains, but the mystery grows colder with each passing year. So here's the thing, maybe the inn never needed a ghost. Maybe the real horror is the silence that follows, the question that lingers unanswered, like the last note of a hymn. And perhaps, the real haunted place isn't the inn but the hearts of those who still remember and still wonder. You ever notice how the wind whispers secrets through the trees, like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear? Sometimes, I wonder if the world is full of stories we just haven't listened to yet. And sometimes, those stories are still waiting in the quiet corners of the world, just beneath the surface of the things we think we know. I hope you'll stay with me, because there's always another tale waiting to be told. And remember, the best stories are the ones that linger in your mind long after the fire has gone out. Now, come along, dear listener. There's one more story to tell, and it's just getting started. You've heard of haunted inns, but this one's got a reputation that's older than the town itself. It's called the Hanged Man Inn, and it's got a ghost that won't let go. It was built in the 1700s, but the stories say it was built on a burial ground. The town's oldest families claim the ground is cursed, and the inn's history is one of blood, betrayal, and a final, terrible act. The locals tell of a ghostly choir that sings at midnight, voices rising and falling like a tide. No one can say for sure if it's a warning, a lullaby, or a call to the dead. Some say the choir is the voices of the people who died in the inn's darkest hours. Others say it's the sound of the one who was hanged and never let go. Either way, the inn is still standing and the ghosts are still singing. So, if you're ever passing through these parts and you hear that choir singing in the dead of night, you might want to keep your distance. Or, if you're brave enough, you might just find out what it is the ghosts are trying to tell you. You've heard the name, but now let me tell you how it all began. The Hangman Inn wasn't always a place of dread. It started as a humble tavern, a gathering spot for travelers and townsfolk alike. It was built in the early 1800s, just after the Revolutionary War, and named for the hanging tree that once stood nearby. The original owner, a man named Elias Thorne, was a quiet but sharp-eyed fellow with a knack for storytelling. He claimed to have inherited the land from his father, a soldier who had been executed for treason. Elias said the tree was his father's final punishment, and the inn was his way of honoring the past. The inn's most infamous resident was a woman named Clara Whitmore. She arrived one stormy evening, claiming she had nowhere else to go. She stayed for weeks, and though she never said a word, the townsfolk whispered that she was the daughter of a disgraced officer who had been executed for treason just like Elias's father. It was said Clara had a strange way of making the inn feel like home. She would hum a lullaby as she cleaned, and some claimed to hear her singing in the dead of night. But when she disappeared one morning, the townsfolk suspected she had been taken by the same forces that had claimed her father. Only this time, the shadows were watching. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Elias never spoke of Clara again, and the inn fell into disrepair after his death. By the time the last owner sold it, the place had become a ruin, a relic of a time when the past was never truly buried. And now, as you listen, you might wonder what secrets still linger in the walls of the Hanged Man Inn. The first signs that something was terribly wrong began with the smell. A faint metallic tang in the air, like rusted nails and old blood clinging to the back of the throat. It was subtle, but it didn't leave. Then came the whispers, not loud, but persistent, like the rustle of paper in an empty room. They followed us through the corridors, not from any source we could see, but from the spaces between the walls. The innkeeper, a quiet man named Elias, insisted it was just the wind. But the wind didn't stir the curtains, and the wind didn't whisper to the walls. We all knew it wasn't the wind. By week's end, the whispers had turned to laughter. High, sharp, and echoing through the rafters. It wasn't the kind of laughter that belonged to anyone who had ever lived here. And then, one night, we heard the singing. Not from the choir, not from any living soul, but from the very walls of the inn. A child's voice, sweet and clear, rising and falling like a lullaby from the grave. You've heard the whispers of the Hanged Man Inn, but you've never heard the song. It's not a tune, it's a warning. A child's voice, high and fragile, singing in the dark like a prayer to the dead. It started in the winter of 1892, when a young girl named Clara disappeared from her room at the inn. Her mother found the door ajar, the nitrous still on the bed, and the window open to a storm-lashed sky. The innkeeper claimed to hear her singing in the night, but no one believed him. They said she ran away, that she was spoiled and too curious for her own good. But the song never stopped. Years later, a new family moved in. The father, a widower, brought his daughter with him. The girl was only 8, but she claimed to hear the song every night, and that the walls were watching her. One morning, they found her in the attic, clutching a doll, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had no memory of leaving her room, and the song had stopped. The doll's eyes were wide, and the air around it felt colder than the rest of the house. The inn was abandoned after that, but the song remains, carried by the wind, a ghostly echo of a child's fear. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. I met a woman in the 1980s who said she heard the choir in the dead of night, just as she was leaving the inn. She said it wasn't music, it was a sound like 1,000 hands clapping in unison, echoing through the stone walls. She said she turned around expecting to see a ghost, but there was nothing. Just the sound, and the feeling of being watched by 1,000 eyes. Another guest said she heard the choir while staying in the same room, but she never told anyone. She said she felt the walls vibrating, like the inn itself was singing. She said she left the room once the singing started, but she swore the echo followed her down the hallway. She still lives in the same town, and she never goes back to that inn. Some say the choir is just the wind in the rafters, but others say it's the voices of those who died in the inn. And they say the ones who listen too closely never leave the same way they came. We began our investigation with the old ledger, its pages brittle and yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. I wondered, did the voices of the hanged ever find their way into those pages? The innkeeper's son had found it in the attic, tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt. He laughed when he told me, but I could tell he was unsettled by the way the words seemed to hum. As we read further, the names began to repeat. Some of them were real people, others were just names, as if the inn had kept a record of all who had passed through its doors, living and dead. One name stood out: Margaret Holloway, a woman who had died in 1915. Her entry was written in a different hand, and it ended with a warning. She knows the truth, but she's not speaking. We followed the trail of names to old newspapers and census records, but nothing matched. It was as if the ledger had been written by someone who had seen the future and had no intention of sharing it. By the time we reached the last entry, the room had gone cold. It was dated 1947, and it read, "The choir is waiting. They are not all dead. They are not all gone." I looked up, and for a moment, I thought I heard a faint, childlike laughter from the rafters. You know, the thing that has never been explained is the sound that comes from the rafters, not the walls, not the floor, but the rafters. A kind of keying, like a child trying to scream but not quite making it. It's not the sound of a ghost. It's not the sound of a spirit. It's something older, something that was never meant to be heard by human ears. It's like the house is remembering something it was never supposed to. No one has ever found the source. No one has ever found the reason. And that's the thing that makes it the most unsettling of all. It's not the ghost. It's the silence that follows the sound. You've heard the stories, but you've never heard the sound. And that's the one thing that has never been explained. The one thing that's always been left behind, waiting for someone to finally listen. You've heard the stories, but the locals still whisper that the choir isn't just ghosts, it's a warning. They say the hanged man's soul still sings, and if you hear it too late, you'll never find your way home. Some say the choir's melody is the sound of the town's past screams, sobs, and the soft hum of a lullaby. It's not just a ghost story, it's a memory that won't let go. A few folks swear they've seen the choir in the woods at midnight, a group of silent figures moving like shadows, their heads bowed in silent prayer. But the most chilling part? No one knows who's in the choir. Some say the hanged man's spirit leads them. Others say it's the townsfolk, still trapped by their own guilt and secrets. So, when you hear that eerie melody at night, don't be surprised if the choir's got a message for you. Just don't be the one who ignores it. You know, some mysteries are like old lace, delicate, frayed at the edges, but still holding shape. The hanged man in's ghostly choir? That's one of them. No one's ever solved it, and no one's ever stopped asking. The locals say the choir still sings in the dead of night, a haunting harmony that echoes through the rafters. But no one's ever heard it, not even the ghosts, maybe. There are theories, of course. Some say it's the voices of the executed, trapped in their own prison. Others think it's the sound of the past refusing to die. But no one knows for sure. So here's the thing, the mystery isn't just about the ghosts. It's about the people who keep coming back, drawn by something they can't explain. Like a siren song that's never ending. And maybe that's why the choir still sings. Because there are always more questions, and sometimes the answer is just the next question waiting in the dark. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Do you ever notice how the wind carries secrets through the trees, like it's whispering something only the lost can hear? And sometimes those echoes don't fade. They linger, like the last note of a song you can't quite remember, like a lullaby sung by someone who's never been born. And if you do, don't be afraid. Just listen. Because sometimes, the only way to find peace is to let the past sing its song, and let it go. Until next time, my dear, may your nights be warm, your heart be light, and your dreams be full of stories worth telling. You've heard of places that whisper, but the hanged man in doesn't just whisper, it sings. A song of sorrow, echoing through the rafters like a ghostly choir, and no one can tell you what it's singing about. Built in the 1800s by a man who had a taste for punishment, it was meant to be a place of justice. But the jail cells became more than just cells, they became the starting point for something far darker. Now, it's a crumbling relic, but the stories don't stop. Some say the choir still sings at night, and it's not just voices, it's the sound of people, trapped, waiting for someone to hear them. And if you're ever curious about what the choir is singing, you might want to ask the innkeeper. He is the only one who's ever claimed to hear it, but he's not the one who's been heard since. You know, the Hanged Man Inn didn't start as a place of terror. It was once a quiet, bustling tavern run by a man named Elias Greaves, who was as charming as he was cunning. Elias wasn't just a tavern keeper, he was a gambler, a storyteller, and a man with a taste for the dramatic. He loved to spin tales of ghosts and goblins, even when there were none. One night, Silas came to collect. He didn't come for money, he came for Elias's life. And so, in the dead of night, Elias was hanged from the tavern's rafters, just like the name of his inn. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The town was in shock, but Elias had left behind a legacy: his tavern, now haunted by the very thing he feared most, a ghost that would never let go. And so the Hanged Man Inn was born, not as a place of death, but as a place where the past refused to be buried. You see it first, the way the dust on the windowsill trembles, like it's being stirred by a hand you can't see. It's not the wind, not the draft, something's watching, waiting. The clock in the hallway stops at 3:17, and the hands don't move again. You check it twice. It's not broken. It's just holding its breath. You find a ledger in the attic, brittle and yellowed, with names and dates scrawled in a shaky hand. The last entry is crossed out, and the ink bleeds through the paper like it's still alive. And then, one morning, you find a small, folded note on your pillow. No return address. Just a single line: "The choir is coming for you." You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never happened. The Hanged Man Inn was built on a spot where a gallows once stood, but the man they hanged, he never existed. Just a story, a legend, a whisper of a man who never walked the earth. But the inn itself? That's where the real mystery begins. It was built in the 1800s by a man named Elias Grant, a man who claimed to have seen the ghost of the Hanged Man in his dreams. He said the man was a boy, no older than 12, tied to a tree and left to die by the town. The inn was never meant to be a place of hospitality. It was built to house the soul of the boy, to keep him from wandering the woods. But Elias didn't know how to hold a ghost. He tried to bind it with chains, with prayers, with silence, but the boy kept coming, always at midnight, always calling for his mother. The townsfolk say Elias went mad. They say he locked the boy in the cellar and never let him out. But the boy never stopped crying. And one night, the boy vanished. The inn was abandoned, the chains left rusting, and the whispers of the boy's voice grew louder and louder, echoing through the empty halls. Now, when the wind howls through the trees, you can still hear it. The hollow choir. They don't sing the same song every night. Some nights it's a lullaby, some nights it's a hymn, and some nights it's just a boy crying for his mother in the dark. I spoke to a woman from Boston who said she heard a choir in the dead of night singing hymns in a language she didn't recognize just outside the windows of the Hanged Man Inn. She said the voices were clear, almost like a choir rehearsing, but the melody was wrong. It felt like a lullaby for the dead. Another man from New Orleans claimed he saw the choir in a dream, a group of silent figures in white, their hands raised like they were about to sing, but never did. He woke up with a chill, the sound of a choir lingering in his ears, like a memory he couldn't quite place but felt in his bones. These are not just stories, they are echoes of something that lingers, a presence that refuses to be silenced. We started with the ledger, the one that had been left behind in the attic. It was a worn leather-bound book, its pages brittle and yellowed, filled with names, dates, and the faint scent of something sweet and old. The names didn't match the records, not exactly. They were real people, but their deaths were never properly documented. Some were listed as missing, others as unaccounted for, as if the inn had taken them and forgotten. We found a diary, tucked inside a hollow in the wall. It was written in the 1920s, and it wasn't just a record of guests, it was a confession. The owner had been trying to atone for something, and the ghosts had started to answer. The diary mentioned a final guest, someone who had arrived under the cover of night and never left. The entry ended abruptly with the owner writing, "They heard the choir and they followed it. I hope they found peace." We never found the final guest's name, but the diary suggested they were a child, someone who had been lost to the inn's past. And if the walls could speak, they might still be waiting for someone to listen. You ever wonder what happens when a place holds more than one secret? The Hanged Man Inn, for all its haunted lore, has one detail that's never been explained. It's like the ghost of a missing note in a song, something that lingers just out of reach. It's the sound, not the creaks or the whispers, but a low, almost imperceptible hum that's been reported by multiple guests. It's not in the walls, not in the floorboards, it's in the air, like the breath of something that's never been fully seen. Some say it's the echo of a voice from the past, a voice that never got to say its final words. Others say it's the soul of a child who never grew up, trapped in the moment they were taken. But no one can say for sure what it is. And that's the thing about the Hanged Man Inn, it doesn't just haunt you. It makes you wonder. It makes you ask questions that don't have answers. And sometimes, that's the scariest part of all. You've heard the stories, but the locals still whisper that the Hanged Man wasn't just a man. Some say he was a boy, no older than 12, hanged for a crime he didn't commit. Others say he was a woman, betrayed by her own family. You ever wonder who the real victim was? There's a legend that on the night of the full moon, the inn's bell rings without a hand to pull it. Some say it's the ghost of the Hanged Man trying to warn the living. Others say it's just the wind. But the bell never rings when the moon is full. Some locals swear they've seen a figure in the window of the inn, dressed in a tattered coat, looking out at the road. It never moves, never speaks, just watches. They say it's the hanged man, waiting for someone to come back. There's also the tale of the choir. Every night at midnight, the inn seems to echo with voices, a soft, haunting melody. Some say it's the souls of the people who died there, singing a lullaby they never got to finish. But here's the kicker: no one knows who the hanged man was, or why he was hanged. That's why the stories keep changing, and that's why the inn still stands, waiting for the next soul to walk its halls. And still, the hanged man inn waits. No one has ever solved the mystery of the hollow choir. No one has ever found the missing children. The town keeps its secrets like a mother guarding her sick child. Some say the choir is a warning, a message from the dead. Others say it's just the wind or the creak of old beams. But I've heard the song, and it's not from this world. The local historian claims the children were never found, but the town's records are missing. It's like the past has been swallowed by the same void that haunts these halls. You might think the story is over, but no. The choir still sings, and the children still wait. And somewhere, in the silence between the notes, a door creaks open. You've heard the stories, felt the chill of the past, but sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never quite leave. What if the ghosts we think we've laid to rest are still waiting for us in the quietest corners of our own lives? The hanged man inn may be gone, but the echoes of its past linger in the hearts of those who have felt its pull. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing is not the ghost, but the silence that follows. As you close your eyes, remember that the stories we tell aren't just about the past. They're about the present, about the lives we live, the choices we make, and the ghosts that might still be watching. And now, as the night deepens, we'll turn our attention to a place where the silence is louder than the screams. A place where the past refuses to be buried. Stay with me, and let's hear the next story. You've heard of haunted places, but have you ever heard of a church where the stones themselves seem to murmur secrets? Blythburgh Church in Suffolk, England, is a place where time seems to pause and the silence is louder than the whispers. Built in the 11th century, this church has stood for over 1,000 years, weathering wars, floods, and the passage of time. But locals say it's not the weather that's changed, it's the voices that now echo through its halls. Some say the voices are the prayers of the faithful, others believe they are the ghosts of those who once prayed here. But what if the whispers are something more, something that lingers, waiting, watching, and never letting go? As you walk through Blythburgh Church, you'll feel the weight of history pressing in on you. The air is thick with the scent of old stone and candle wax, and the silence is so complete it feels like it's holding its breath. But what exactly is it that the church is whispering? Is it a warning, a memory, or something far more unsettling? You'll have to come back and find out, because some stories are only just beginning. You ever wonder how a place like this, quiet, ancient, and full of secrets, could end up haunted? It all started with a man named Roger de Blyth, a Norman lord who built this church in the 12th century. Roger was a powerful man, but he had a wife named Margaret, who was said to be both kind and cunning. Their marriage was troubled, and rumors say she was accused of witchcraft during the time of the Black Death. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The villagers, scared and suspicious, turned against her. They claimed she cursed the land, and the church itself began to weep. But Roger, ever the protector, stood by her, even as the world turned against them. In the end, Margaret was burned at the stake, and Roger was left to rebuild the church with a heart full of grief. He never spoke of her again, but the whispers in the woods and the church have never stopped. And so, the story of Blythburgh began not with ghosts, but with love, betrayal, and the weight of history. The woods have been whispering ever since. You remember the way the wind would carry the scent of damp earth and old stone through those ancient trees. It was peaceful until the whispers started, just a faint murmur at first, like the church bells had a secret they couldn't keep. The villagers said it was the wind, the trees, the way the light played tricks on the eyes. But I'll never forget how the voices seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the woods themselves were listening. One morning, a farmer came back from the woods with a look in his eyes like he'd seen something that shouldn't be seen. He said the trees were bending, the stones were moving, and the air had a weight to it, like the world was holding its breath. The first real sign was the absence of sound. The birds stopped singing, the wind stopped whispering, and the silence was so thick it pressed against your ears. It was then that you knew something had shifted in the woods. And then, the whispers grew louder, not in words but in meaning. They were calling, not to warn, but to beckon. And if you listened too closely, you could almost hear the echo of a child's laughter lost in the trees. You ever notice how some places feel like they're holding their breath? Blythburgh Church isn't just old, it's holding on for dear life. And in the woods beyond, something old and hungry is waiting. One stormy October night, a young woman named Eliza vanished in those woods. She was just leaving the church, her boots crunching on the gravel path, her hand clutching a faded photograph of her family. No one knows what happened to Eliza. The police found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just the faintest whisper of her name, carried on the wind, as if the woods themselves were trying to tell the truth. Some say the woods are still waiting for her. Some say they're waiting for us. And if you're ever in Blithburg, don't let the trees talk to you when the wind is howling. You might not be able to stop them. I've spoken to several locals who swear they've heard the whispers at dusk when the trees seem to breathe. One woman told me she heard her own name called from the woods, only to find no one there. Another man said he was hiking with his dog and heard a child's voice calling from the underbrush until he turned and saw the dog had run off, leaving only a single bootprint in the mud. A local priest once told me he heard the whispers during a midnight service, so faint he thought they were just the wind. But then he said it was like the church was speaking to itself. And then there's the one who never came home. A young man who vanished in the 1970s, last seen heading into the woods. His family says they still hear his name at night, carried on the wind like a lullaby. We began our investigation with a simple walk through the churchyard. But the moment we stepped beyond the ancient stone walls, the air grew thick, like it was holding its breath. The first strange thing was the sound like a voice just out of reach, repeating a name that wasn't ours. I asked the group if they heard it too, and they all gave the same quiet nod. Then there were the symbols. We found them carved into the wood of the church door, old, faded, but unmistakable. There were the same markings as on the grave of the first victim, centuries ago. The most unsettling thing, though, was the feeling of being watched. Not by anyone, but by something that had been there all along, waiting for us to come close. By the time we left, the sky had turned to night, and the woods were silent again. But we all knew this silence was too perfect, too heavy with the weight of something unseen. You ever notice how some places hold secrets that just won't let go? Blithburg Church has one detail that's been gnawing at the edges of every investigation. No one can say for sure what exactly the whispers are about. Some say it's the wind, others say it's the memory of a child who never grew up. But the thing is, no one's ever found a body, and the church records are as silent as the stones beneath our feet. What if the whispers aren't about the past at all? What if they're trying to tell us something we've forgotten or never wanted to hear? We'll never know the truth, but that's the point, isn't it? Some secrets are meant to linger in the dark, whispering just enough to make you wonder if you're still awake. Some say the whispers come from the stones themselves, ancient and heavy with the weight of centuries. Others believe they're the voice of the church's first priest, lost to time and never truly laid to rest. The local librarian, Mrs. Hargreaves, insists the voices are just the wind moving through the pews, but she's been known to pause mid-sentence and listen, her eyes wide with something that isn't quite fear. And then there are the stories about the child who vanished in 1923. No body, no trail, just a doll left on the altar with a single red ribbon tied around its wrists. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a message. You've heard the stories, of course, but have you ever wondered what the whispers sound like? Or if, just for a moment, you might hear them too, when the wind is just right and the silence is heavy with something that feels like memory. You've heard the stories, but what if the truth is even darker? The mystery of Blithburg isn't just about ghosts, it's about a missing child, a vanished life, and a village that still doesn't know how to say goodbye. No one knows where the boy went. Some say he was taken by the woods, others say he wandered off. But the villagers know one thing, the forest has never let him go. They say the woods whisper his name in the wind, but no one dares to listen. The silence is louder than the stories, and the truth is still buried where the trees touch the sky. So, you tell me, what do you think happened to the boy? Did the woods take him, or did he take himself? And if he's still out there, is he waiting for someone to finally find him? You know, sometimes the silence is the loudest whisper. The woods don't need to shout to make you feel small. And sometimes, the most haunted places aren't the ones that scream. They're the ones that make you wonder if you're the one who's been forgotten. But don't worry, dear listener. The next story will be just as warm, just as cozy, and just as full of secrets. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go fetch another cup of tea, and maybe a new tale. You've heard of the Sierra Nevada, but have you ever imagined what it was like to be caught in its icy grip during the winter of 1846? This place, this mountain range, it's not just rock and snow, it's a tomb for the lost. The Donner Party was a group of pioneers, not outlaws, not fools, just people trying to make it across the West. But the mountains had other plans. They trapped them, and the cold, the hunger, and the fear took over. These mountains have a memory. They remember the screams, the prayers, the desperate hope of people who thought they were going to make it, but they didn't. And now, they're not so far from us. So, What do you think? Was it the cold that took them, or the silence? Or maybe the truth, something we've never been brave enough to face? Let's walk through the snow and find out. You know, the Donner Party wasn't just a group of pioneers, it was a whole family of dreamers, like you and me, chasing a better life. Some were farmers, some were adventurers, but all of them had something in common. They believed the West was calling them. They set off in 1846, thinking they'd reach California in just a few months. But the mountains were bigger than they imagined, and the snow came faster than the wagons could move. As the days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned to months, the situation grew dire. Supplies ran out, and the cold became a silent killer. People started to lose their minds, and the fear became worse than the snow. Some tried to survive by eating the remains of the dead, others tried to escape, but the mountains were unrelenting. And when the rescue finally came, it wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning of a new one. You remember the first time you noticed the weather was acting strange, like the sky had forgotten how to look at the sun. It was a quiet Sunday, and the air felt too still, like the world had paused just to listen. Then came the whispers, soft, like the wind through the trees, but not the trees. You could feel them in your bones, like the world was trying to tell you something you weren't ready to hear. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Then, the dreams. You woke up with a chill, and the same image. A snow-covered trail, a frozen lake, and a figure in the distance, too far to reach. You couldn't tell if it was a dream or a warning. And finally, the silence. The kind that makes your skin prickle, the kind that says something has left, and something else has taken its place. You could feel it in the air, like the world had changed, and you hadn't. You remember the snow, don't you? That first night. The cold crept in like a thief, stealing warmth from your bones and your hope. The wind howled like a lost child, and the firelight flickered like a dying heartbeat. They tried to build a fire, but the wind kept blowing it out. The snow piled up so high, you could barely see your own feet. And then silence. No voices, no laughter, just the sound of the wind and the cold. It was then they found the body. Not a body, but something worse. A piece of a person, half buried in the snow, wrapped in a blanket like it was trying to hold on. The air was thick with something you couldn't name. They said it was just a child, but the snow had taken more than that. It had taken their will to live, their laughter, their dreams. And in the silence, the cold crept in deeper, and the snow began to speak. I've read the letters from the survivors, and they're not what you'd call cheerful. One woman wrote of eating snow to stave off hunger, and the others laughed when she said it tasted like the breath of a dead man. Another account describes a man who cut his own hand to bleed out the cold, and then ate the blood. They say it was the only way to feel warm, and the only way to stay alive. She didn't know if it was madness or something real, but she swore the voices got louder the closer they came to the mountains. And when they reached the pass, the voices stopped. Some say the voices were the souls of those they left behind. Others say it was the mountain itself, trying to remind them that they were never meant to be there. But no one knows for sure. The investigation began with a whisper. A rumor passed through generations, a name that didn't quite fit. The local historian, a woman with silver hair and a quiet curiosity, said she'd found a diary, buried in the snow, written in a shaky hand. She described the snowfall, the freezing wind, the desperate voices calling through the trees. It wasn't just a story, it was a plea for someone to remember the names they'd forgotten. As the researchers dug deeper, they found a pattern. Letters, artifacts, even a child's toy, all pointing to people who had been forgotten. Some were buried with dignity, others not at all. The most unsettling find was a name no one remembered her. A young woman, her fate uncertain, her story lost in the silence of the mountains. And in that silence, something still waited. They called it a ghost, but maybe it was just the memory of a woman who had never been found. And in the quiet of the snow, she still called out, not for help, but for a name. You know, the one thing that's never been explained? It's not the snow, or the hunger, or the madness. It's the silence. The silence after they were found. The silence after the bodies were buried. The silence after the survivors left. What happened to the ones who didn't make it out? Some say they were taken. Others say they were left. But no one knows what happened to the bodies that were never found. The ones who vanished into the mountains without a trace. Did they die? Did they escape? Or did they stay? You see, the Donner Party isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of what happens when the world turns its back on you. And sometimes, when the world turns its back, it doesn't turn back at all. So, what do you think? Did they find peace in the mountains, or did they become something else entirely? Something that still waits in the snow for the right moment to come out of the silence? You ever hear the story about the man who found a bone in the snow? Some say it was a child's finger, others insist it was a hand with rings on it. But no one's ever been able to find the body, not even the ones who swear they saw a shadow moving through the trees. The locals say the Donner Party didn't just vanish, they were taken. Some say the mountains themselves swallowed them whole, others insist they were murdered by their own. But the truth, it's buried under snow and silence, waiting for someone to dig it up. You might think the Donner Party is just a tale for the campfire, but some say it's still alive in the stories. They say the ghosts of those lost still walk the snow, still cry out for help, still wait for someone to come and find them. And that's why the stories still live on. Not because they're scary, but because they're real. Real enough to make you wonder, what if you were the one who found the bone, the whisper, the shadow? What if the mountains still have more to say? You've heard the tales of the Donner Party, but what about the ones that never made it to the books? The ones that linger in the silence of the Sierra Nevada, waiting for someone to listen. No one knows for sure how many were lost or who exactly was left behind. The records are fragmented, the stories are conflicting, and the truth seems to have been buried by time and fear. The mystery isn't just about the past, it's about the people who were forgotten, the ones who never got to tell their story. And maybe, just maybe, they're still trying to find their way home. So, as you sit here, wrapped in a blanket, let me ask you, what if the Donner Party wasn't just a tragedy, but a warning? A reminder that even the strongest of us can be swallowed by the mountain, and sometimes the silence is louder than a storm. You know, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we never hear, the ones that got left in the snow, forgotten by time. We talk about ghosts and hauntings, but what if the real horror is the silence that follows, the absence of a voice that should have been heard? As we move on to the next tale, I can't help but wonder, what voices are still waiting to be heard, just beyond the edge of our memory? Stay with me, my dear listeners, for the next story may not be so far from home, and it may not be so far from you. You've heard of the Jersey Shore, right? But what if I told you beneath the boardwalk and the laughter, there's a place that whispers of something far darker? This isn't just any stretch of beach. It's a spot where the sea seems to hold its breath, and the air feels heavy with secrets it's been guarding for decades. Some say the inn was built on a spot where the water once ran red. Others say the stories are just that, stories, but the locals know better. And if you walk the path behind the inn, you might hear the sound of waves, but not the sound of waves. It's something else entirely, something that doesn't belong. So come with me now, and let's step into the heart of this place where the sea doesn't just meet the shore, it remembers. You know, the first real clue about these missing folks came from a local fisherman who said he saw a shadowy figure dragging a heavy bag out of the surf one stormy night. It wasn't long before the town started whispering about something in the water. The police didn't take it seriously at first, just a few missing people, a few rumors. But the more they dug, the more they found a pattern. And the more they found, the more they realized something was very, very wrong. The first real bodies were found in the late 70s. They were in terrible shape, some missing limbs, others just gone. The police didn't know what to do. The water was too deep, the tides too strong, and the town too quiet. People started to believe the sea was punishing them for something. Some said it was a curse, others a warning, but no one ever got to the bottom of it. The stories just kept getting darker, and the water kept pulling. And that's when the real mystery began. Not just who was taken, but why. And who, if anyone, was still out there, watching the tides and waiting for the next soul to be claimed. You ever notice how the first hints of something wrong are always the quietest? Like the way the tide pulls back just before the storm, leaving the shore bare and strange, as if it's holding its breath. It started with a few missing things, a wallet, a scarf, a pair of sunglasses. Not stolen, just gone, like they were never there to begin with. People laughed it off, thinking it was just the shore playing tricks. Some said it was a prank, a joke gone too far. Others whispered that the water had taken them, or that the sea was angry. But no one could explain why the sand was always too clean, as if something had been dragged away and left behind. And then the first body was found. Not in the water, not on the shore, but in the woods behind the boardwalk where no one ever went. It was just a shirt, a pair of shoes, and a strange, empty feeling in the air. You ever wonder what it's like to walk ashore where the tide doesn't just pull the sand, but pulls your soul into the dark? That's where it all began, with the first signs that something was terribly wrong. You've heard the stories about the Jersey Shore, saltwater, sun, and summer. But what if I told you there was a place where the waves whispered secrets, and the sand held more than just footprints? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It was the early 1990s, and a young woman named Nicole Smith vanished without a trace. No body, no clues, just a pair of her shoes found washed up on the shore, as if the sea had tried to swallow her whole. Neighbors said she was a free spirit, always dancing on the edge of the water, chasing the tide. But the night she disappeared, the moon was blood red and the wind carried a sound like a child's cry, echoing through the dunes. Her disappearance was never solved. Some say the sea took her, others that she ran, and still others that she never left at all. But one thing is certain, the shore has never been the same since. And now, as you sit here listening, I wonder what secrets might the shore still be holding. And why does the wind still whisper her name on the night tide? I spoke to a woman in Asbury Park who says she saw a figure in the water one foggy night. She swore it had no face, just a body wrapped in what looked like old newspaper. She said the figure moved like it was being pulled under. She tried to call out, but her voice just echoed back at her. No one else heard it. She still doesn't talk about it much. He said the body was just a shape, like a child's doll, all limbs and no face. He said it looked like it had been dragged through the sand, but when he tried to touch it, it vanished. Another witness, a young woman who used to walk the boardwalk at night, said she saw a shadowy figure on the beach. It moved like it was dancing, but she couldn't tell if it was real or just her imagination. She said it was too graceful, too deliberate. It didn't look like a person. It looked like something that had once been human, but now had no shape, no soul, just a memory. These stories don't add up to a full explanation, but they do add up to something. Something that's still out there, in the water, in the fog, in the silence between the waves. The investigation started with a call from a local historian, someone who knew the shore like the back of their hand. They said the records had been buried, but not forgotten. They found names, dates, and a pattern that didn't fit the usual stories. No one knew why the victims had vanished, but the silence around them was louder than any explanation. They dug into the old files, and the more they uncovered, the more the mystery deepened. There were whispers of rituals, of secrets passed down through generations, but no one dared to speak them aloud. Some said the shore had always been a place of secrets. Others said it had always been a place of loss. But one thing was clear, the past wasn't done with them. And so, the investigation continued, not for the answers but for the stories. Because sometimes, the truth is just the beginning of another tale. You've heard all the theories, but there's one thing no one can explain. The killer didn't just take lives, they took something personal, something intimate, and no one knows what it was. They didn't just leave the bodies, they left something behind. Something that's never been found, and that's what keeps the question alive, even after all these years. They say the killer was a local, someone who knew the area better than anyone, but even the locals don't know what they took, or why. That's the real horror, and so, the case remains unsolved, not because of lack of evidence, but because of the one thing they can't prove, the one detail that has never been explained. You think you know the story, but you don't, and that's what makes it feel real, like it's still happening, right now. Some say the Jersey Shore isn't just haunted by the past, it's haunted by the present. They whisper that the tides carry something more than salt water, something that lingers just beneath the surface. There's a local legend about a woman who vanished decades ago, her body never found. They say her spirit still walks the boardwalk, searching for answers she never got. Theories swirl like the ocean breeze. Some say the killer was a local, others that it was a serial predator who never left the shore. But no one ever finds the truth, because the truth was never meant to be found. And so, the stories live on, passed from one generation to the next, like a family secret. A warning, a comfort, a reminder that some places hold more than just memories, they hold the echoes of the lost. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that end with a body found, but the ones that vanish without a trace. The Jersey Shore has its share of tales, but this one? It's still whispering in the salt air, waiting for someone to listen. The last known sighting of the missing woman was just before the storm hit. She was walking along the boardwalk, her shoes soaked, her coat flapping in the wind. The tide was high, and the waves were loud like the world was trying to drown out her last call for help. They say the sea takes what it wants, but sometimes it just disappears. And sometimes the silence is louder than any scream. You ever wonder what it's like to be lost between the waves and the shore, with no one left to remember your name? So here's the thing, dear listener. The mystery isn't just about what happened, it's about what's still out there, waiting. In the tide pools, in the fog, in the spaces between the stories we've told ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for you. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers, like the shore at dusk when the waves are gentle, but the wind carries something else entirely. It's not the scream that haunts us, but the silence that follows. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you're the only one who heard it at all. So, as we turn the page, let's not forget that the shore isn't just a place, it's a story. One that's still being written, and one that may never end. Now, let's go deeper, into the unknown, into the tales that wait just beyond the next wave. You've heard of the Sierra Nevada, haven't you? That towering wall of snow and silence, where the wind howls like a lost soul. But what about the valley beyond it? That's where the Donner Party's story begins, where the cold didn't just bite, it took lives. Imagine this, a group of pioneers, full of hope, heading west. They believed they were chasing fortune, freedom, and the American dream. But the mountains had other plans. The snow came early, and the roads vanished into white oblivion. The story of the Donner Party is one of survival, but also of sacrifice. And when the snow finally melted, so did the bodies of those who couldn't make it. Now, decades later, the land still remembers them. But what really lingers here isn't just the memory of the past. It's the feeling that the valley still holds its secrets, and that the cold, the silence, and the snow might still be waiting for someone to listen. You know, the Donner Party wasn't just a group of pioneers, it was a family, a community, a whole bunch of people who believed they were heading west for a better life. But what they didn't know is that the mountains would take everything from them. They started in 1846, heading west with wagon trains full of dreams and supplies. Some were farmers, some were carpenters, some were just folks looking for a fresh start. But the trail was more treacherous than they imagined. As days turned to weeks, desperation took hold. They resorted to eating animals, then each other. The stories of what happened next are heartbreaking, but the real tragedy is that no one was prepared for what the mountains would do to them. Some of them survived, but not all. The Donner Party became a cautionary tale of human weakness in the face of nature's fury. And now, their story lives on in the silence of the mountains, where the wind still carries their whispers. You remember how the weather turned, didn't you? That first chill in the air, like the world had forgotten how to breathe. It wasn't just the cold, it was the silence, the way the wind seemed to hold its breath. The Donner Party didn't just face the elements, they faced the unknown. Supplies were running low, and the snow was getting heavier. It was like the mountains themselves had turned against them, closing in like a clenched fist. People started to change. The ones who had been strong and sure now moved like ghosts, their eyes hollow. It wasn't just hunger or cold, it was something else, something they couldn't name, something that crept into their bones. Then came the first whispers, not of wind or voices, but of something else. A feeling like the air had turned heavy, like the mountains were watching, waiting. And somehow, they all knew it wasn't just the cold anymore. The silence between the snowflakes grew louder, and somewhere, in the distance, the wind began to howl not just from the sky, but from the earth itself, as if the mountains were trying to tell a story they'd rather not hear. You see it now, don't you? The snow, the silence, the weight of the world pressing in. And then silence. No voices, no footsteps, just the wind howling through the trees like a ghost trying to find its way home. They had no choice. The snow was too deep, the food was gone, and the cold was eating them alive. They tried to keep going, but the mountains swallowed them whole. You can almost hear their voices, just beneath the snow. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. I've read letters from survivors, and they speak of a strange calm before the storm. One woman said the snow fell in silence, like the world had forgotten to breathe. Another wrote of hearing laughter in the night, not from the living, but from the wind that howled through the trees like voices trying to be heard. He said it was a woman, but no one could say for sure. Some thought it was a ghost, others a trick of the mind, but the fear of it lingered long after the snow melted. These testimonies don't tell us what happened, but they tell us what the survivors felt: fear, desperation, and a sense that they were being watched by something beyond the veil. And so, the story of the Donner Party becomes more than a tale of survival, it becomes a whisper in the wind, a question left unanswered by time and snow. We followed the trail of bones and stories to a forgotten gravesite where the wind whispered secrets we weren't ready to hear. The ground was soft, as if the earth itself remembered the weight of those lost. The investigators found something strange: marks on the soil that didn't match any known tool or hand. They looked like claw prints, but there was no animal nearby. It was as if something else had left its mark. Then came the strange symbols carved into the wood of nearby trees. They weren't from any known indigenous language, but they carried a heavy, ancient weight. It felt like a message from the past, warning us not to disturb what was left behind. The most unsettling discovery was a small, folded piece of paper hidden in the roots of a tree. It was written in a shaky hand, and the words were not in English. It was a plea, or a warning, or something in between. The investigation didn't end with bones or symbols. It ended with a question that no one could answer. What were these people trying to tell us? And why did they leave their stories buried with the dead? You ever wonder what the last thing they saw was? The moonlight on snow, or the glint of a knife in the dark? Maybe they just looked at each other and thought, this is it. The diary entries stop in mid-sentence. No more words, just a blank page. Like the writer reached for something and found nothing. Just silence. They never found the body. Not the one that was lost. Not the one that was never found. Just the button. Like the world forgot they were ever there. And so, the Donner Party's last secret remains. A mystery wrapped in snow, untouched by time. Just a button, and a question that never gets answered. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly whisper? In the quiet of a darkened diner, folks still talk about the Donner Party, not as ghosts but as cautionary tales. Some say the snow didn't just bury the Donner Party, it buried their names. Others insist the mountains still guard their secrets, and that the wind carries their voices on the coldest nights. There's a theory, you know, that the ones who survived didn't just escape the mountains, they carried their ghosts with them, passing them down like heirlooms in a family of survivors. And then there's the idea that the Donner Party wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning, a lesson in human folly, and a reminder that the wilderness never forgets. So next time you're in the mountains, listen carefully. Sometimes, the wind doesn't just carry snow, it carries stories that have been waiting a long time to be told. Even now, decades later, the Donner Party's story lingers in the bones of the Sierra Nevada. Some say the wind whispers their names, and the snow remembers. Was it hunger, fear, or something more sinister that drove them to the unthinkable? No one knows for sure, and that's what keeps the mystery alive. And so we return to the question that haunts us all. What would you have done if you were there? Would you have chosen survival, or would you have chosen to stay? The mountains may have buried their secrets, but they never truly let go. And neither do we. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that end in tragedy, but the ones that linger in the quietest corners of our minds, waiting for the right wind to stir them up again. The Donner Party's ghosts may have faded from history, but their whispers still echo through the mountains, reminding us that even in the coldest places, the heart can still feel the warmth of a shared fear. So, before we move on, take a moment to let the silence settle around you, and let the weight of the unknown press gently against your chest. Now, if you're ready, we'll turn the page, and the next tale will be waiting just beyond the next hill, with its own secrets to share. You've heard of haunted mansions and creaky old houses, but what about a place where the ghosts don't just whisper, they demand to be heard? The Royal Winnipeg Rifles, a storied military unit, once called this place home. This was no ordinary barracks. It was a place of war, of pride, of blood, and beneath its floors, deep in the earth, lay a secret that never left. The vaults were built to protect secrets, military records, weapons, even the bodies of fallen soldiers. But some say it was more than that. Some say the vaults were built to hold something that refused to stay buried. Now, decades later, the place is abandoned, but the stories don't stop. You've heard the whispers. You've heard the footsteps. But have you ever wondered what or who was never meant to be found? You ever heard of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles? They were a proud unit, raised in 1882, right here in Canada. A bunch of young men, eager to serve, but the war they were sent to was anything but a picnic. They were shipped off to the Boer War in South Africa, where the heat was brutal and the battles were fierce. You could say they fought for the crown, but some say they fought for something else entirely. But here's the kicker. Some of those soldiers never made it back. Some say they were killed in action. Others say they vanished without a trace. And then there's the rumors about the vaults back home. These vaults were supposed to hold the unit's honor, their medals and mementos. But over the years, people started to say they were more like a tomb for the lost. And the dead weren't done with the living. So you might be wondering, what happened to those poor souls? And why do the vaults still feel so heavy, like something's been buried there for a long, long time? You remember the first time you heard that whispered in the vault. It was late, and the air had gone still, like the world had forgotten to breathe. You thought it was the wind, until it started again, just a breath, like someone was trying to say your name. The next morning, the janitor found a single boot print in the dust, too big, too clean, like it had been pressed by a foot that didn't belong to any living man. He laughed it off, but you could see the way his hands trembled when he picked it up. The first time you saw it, you didn't know what it was. It was a shape, just a shape like a man, but not a man, like a memory that had been forgotten and then remembered too late. It stood at the end of the hallway, just out of reach, watching. And then the voices, not loud, not angry, just a soft murmur, like a lullaby from a long-dead mother. You could hear them in the silence, in the dust, in the stone. They said nothing, but you knew exactly what they wanted. You tried to tell yourself it was all in your head, but the head was the one that had the cold fingers, the one that felt the weight of something heavy and unseen pressing against the back of your neck, just as you turned to look. You've heard the whispers, but now you're standing in the cold, empty hall of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. The silence is heavier than the snow outside. It's like the building itself is holding its breath. One night in 1973, a young soldier named James O'Connor vanished without a trace. His uniform was found neatly folded in his room, and his boots were still by the door, as if he just left. The soldiers who were there that night swear they heard his voice, calling for help, but when they went to find him, there was nothing but silence. It's as if he was never there at all. To this day, no one knows what happened to James O'Connor. Some say he was taken by the ghosts of the Rifles, others say he ran away, and a few say he never existed at all. But the building still remembers. I've spoken to dozens of veterans, and not one of them will say the Rifles ever felt quite right. They'll talk about the cold, the silence, the way the walls seemed to breathe. One man told me he once heard a child's laughter echoing down the corridors, only to realize it was the sound of his own breath. Another swore he saw a figure in the hallway, but when he turned, there was nothing. There's a story about a soldier who disappeared during a training exercise. They found his gear in the basement, but not the man. Some say he is still there, trapped by the silence and the weight of history. These aren't just stories, they're echoes of something real. The Rifles have a way of keeping secrets, and the vaults are the last place they'll ever let the truth out. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, where the dust was thick and the silence louder than the noise of the city outside. Every record seemed to hint at something missing, like a puzzle with half the pieces buried. The more we dug, the more we realized the military had buried more than just the past, it had buried the truth. Files were sealed, dates were erased, and a handful of names vanished like ghosts from the official record. One file, buried deep in the back, held a single page from a long-forgotten journal. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. They don't want us to remember. Not the soldiers, not the silence, not the screams that never left the tunnels. We found more than just names. We found a pattern, dates, locations, and a trail of disappearances that led back to the very heart of the regiment's history. The past wasn't buried, it was hidden. And that's when we realized the investigation wasn't just about uncovering the past, it was about confronting the present. The past wasn't just in the records. It was in the air, in the silence, and in the people who still lived with its weight. You know, there's one thing about the Royal Winnipeg Rifles that no one can quite wrap their head around. It's not the ghosts, not the whispers in the walls, not even the way the cold lingers like a memory. It's the silence just before the scream. They found the body in 1975, but no one knows how it got there. The police said it was a suicide, but the room was locked from the inside. And the bullet, well, it wasn't even in the body. They tried to lock the vault down after that, but the silence never left. It's like the walls remember something we don't. And sometimes, in the dead of night, you can hear it, just a whisper, a sigh, a breath that wasn't meant to be. So here's the thing, dear listener. If you ever find yourself in that place, remember this. The silence is not an absence. It's a presence. And sometimes, it's waiting for you. Some say the voices you hear in the tunnels aren't just echoes, they're the ghosts of soldiers who never made it home. Others whisper that the Rifles' basement was sealed for a reason. A local historian once told me the Rifles' basement was built during the war, meant to hold supplies, but it became a prison for the wounded. And some say the spirits still cling to those walls. Some locals still claim to hear the sound of marching boots at night, or feel a chill when the wind slips through the cracks of the old building. But they won't say much, most just shake their heads and smile. And then there are the ones who say the Rifles' basement was never meant to hold people at all, it was built to hold something else, something that still lingers in the silence. So, what do you think? Was it a place of death, or a place where something else was waiting? The answer, my dear, might still be buried in the dark. So many years have passed, yet the whispers still echo through the stone. No one has ever found the body, and no one has ever spoken of it again. What if the silence is just another kind of scream? The military moved on, the building stood empty for decades, and now it's a museum. But the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes, it just waits for the right moment to rise. We may never know the truth, but the story is still being told. It's not just about the missing soldier, it's about the questions that refuse to die, and the silence that refuses to speak. So here's the thing. If you're ever in Winnipeg and you find yourself walking past the museum, listen closely. You might just hear the echo of a voice calling out from the dark. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. Like the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, where ghosts don't just linger, they wait. And sometimes, the silence between footsteps is louder than any scream. You hear it, don't you? That whisper in the vaults just before the lights go out. But let's not linger too long. There's another tale waiting, just beyond the edge of the firelight. One that's been waiting for you to listen. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear the wind or maybe, just maybe, a ghost. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place whispered about in the shadows of history where secrets sleep deeper than the dark. It's not just a name, it's a legend. Nestled in the mountains of France, it's a place where time seems to stand still. Some say it's a sanctuary for the persecuted, others a prison for the guilty. But one thing's certain, no one leaves unchanged. It's not just the stones that whisper, it's the silence that follows. A silence so heavy, it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. You can almost hear the ghosts of those who once called this place home. So, what do you think? Was it a refuge, a trap, or something far worse? The Priory of Sion is more than a place, it's a mystery wrapped in stone, waiting for someone to uncover its truth. You ever wonder how a place like the Priory of Sion got its start? It wasn't just a fancy name, it was a real, living thing, built by a group of scholars and mystics in the 12th century. They called themselves the Knights Templar, but they were more like secret keepers of ancient wisdom. These knights weren't fighting wars or crusading for the church, they were protecting something far older, something they believed was hidden from the world. They were guardians of knowledge, and their mission was to safeguard the wisdom of the ancients. You know how sometimes the first crack in the ice is just a whisper? That's how it started here. A flicker in the corner of your eye, a sound that wasn't quite there. It was subtle, like a sigh in the wind. The caretaker swore he heard it first, a low, mournful hum, like a bell far away. He said it came from the crypt, but when he went to check, there was nothing but silence and the scent of damp earth. Then came the letters. Not from anyone, but slipped under doors, written in an old hand. They spoke of a curse, of a secret buried beneath the stones. Some said the priory had been built on the bones of a saint. Others claimed it was a place where the living were punished for their sins. And then, the whispers. Not just in the night, but in the day. People said the wind carried voices, the stones remembered names. Some said it was the priory itself, telling its story to those who would listen. By the time the first disappearance happened, the town had already begun to believe. They called it the priory's curse, the echo of a past they'd never quite forgiven. But no one knew what it had truly been guarding. You remember the night the moon hummed low and the wind howled like a mournful ghost. The old caretaker vanished without a sound, just like that. No one heard a thing, no one saw a thing. Just a locked door and a silence so thick it pressed against the skin. The next morning, his key was found in the lock and his bed was cold. No signs of struggle, no trace of him. Just the echo of his absence in the silence. It was as if he'd never been there at all. They say the priory has a way of taking people who ask too many questions. And this man, he'd been digging into the old secrets for years. His disappearance wasn't a mystery, it was a warning. Now, every time the wind blows through the priory's halls, they whisper his name. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the echo of a door closing just as it did the night he disappeared. I was told by a woman who lived in the village for 30 years that the priory's stones seemed to breathe at night. She swore she heard a low, hollow groan from the walls, like the earth itself was mourning. Another man, a former priest, claimed he once saw a shadowy figure walking the cloisters at midnight. He said it was dressed in a white habit, but the face was obscured, and the figure never moved when he called out. Some say the priory is haunted by the ghosts of those who died in the wars that once raged here. A farmer's daughter told me she saw a child's hand reaching through a cracked window, pointing toward the woods. One of the most disturbing accounts came from a local historian who said he found a diary in the priory's archives. It was written in a woman's hand, and every entry ended with the same phrase, "I am not here." These stories are not meant to scare, but to remind us that history is never truly buried. The priory still whispers, and those who listen may hear something they're not prepared for. We followed the trail of whispers to an old monastery in the French countryside, where the air felt heavier than the stone walls. The nuns had long since left, but their stories lingered like smoke. The caretaker, a wiry man with a haunted look, led us through rooms that smelled of aged parchment and something more elusive like the scent of a long-dead secret. The investigation led us to a hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, where the walls were lined with cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. As we peered into the chamber, we found a sealed box containing a collection of letters, some written by the last abbess, others by unknown hands, all filled with a deep, desperate sorrow. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40-ounce tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Among them was a final letter, written in a trembling hand, that spoke of a curse not just on the Abbey, but on the bloodline that had once protected it. You ever notice how some secrets just refuse to stay buried? The Priory of Sion has a legacy so thick with whispers, it's like the walls are holding their breath. There's one thing about this place that never gets explained: why the last known heir vanished without a trace. No body, no clues, just silence where there should have been a story. The last known heir's final letter, written in their own hand, ends with a single word, wait. And that's all. No explanation, no context, just that one word left in the dark. So here's the thing, dear listener, some places don't just hold ghosts. They hold questions, and sometimes the silence is louder than any scream. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly whisper in the dark? Some say the wind carries the voices of the old ones, telling secrets they never meant to share. They claim the stones of the priory still remember the pain of those who lived and died there. Some believe the echoes of the past are not just sounds, but warnings. There is a theory, passed down like a family heirloom, that the priory was built on a site where ancient rituals once took place. Some say it was a place of power, others say it was a prison for the damned. And then there are the children, who still play by the old stones, chasing shadows and whispering to the wind. They say if you listen closely, the stones will answer. You might think these are just old tales, but sometimes, the stories we tell become the truth we live with. What do you believe, dear listener? You know, sometimes the most chilling mysteries aren't the ones that were ever solved, but the ones that still whisper in the dark, waiting for someone to listen. To this day, the names of those who vanished from the priory remain unknown, like footprints erased by the wind. We followed the trail, but it leads only to silence, like the echo of a voice that never quite reaches you. And so, we stand at the edge of mystery that refuses to be solved, holding its secrets like a cold, unyielding hand. Perhaps the truth is not meant to be found, but to be felt, in the stillness, in the silence, and in the lingering weight of the past. You might think the priory's secrets are buried, but sometimes the past has a way of finding you. Did you ever notice how the wind whispers through the trees like it's trying to tell you something? The stories we've shared tonight are more than just tales, they're echoes of a world that once was. And sometimes those echoes still linger, waiting for the right listener to hear them. If you ever find yourself wandering through a quiet place at dusk, listen closely. Sometimes, the past doesn't want to be forgotten, it wants to be remembered. Before we move on, I want to leave you with this. Some legends don't end, they just wait for the right moment to begin again. Now, I think you want to hear the next story. It's about a house that never sleeps, and a ghost that's still waiting for its final chapter. You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what lies behind its ancient stone walls? A place where secrets have bled into the stones for centuries. The bloodstained staircase where whispers of the past still echo through the dark. This isn't just a castle, it's a graveyard of kings, queens, and the innocent. The staircase itself is said to be cursed, with blood from centuries of violence seeping into its worn steps. Some say it's the only place where the ghost of the dead can be heard. The staircase is more than a path, it's a symbol of power, betrayal, and the price of history. Every step you take feels like you're walking in the footsteps of those who came before, some of whom never left. And now you're here, standing at the edge of something far older than you. The blood-stained staircase is not just a place, it's a story waiting to be told. One that's been waiting for someone like you to finally listen. Now, let's step back in time to the 14th century, when the Tower of London was more than a prison, it was a symbol of power, pride, and peril. It was built by William the Conqueror, but it was Henry Roman III who truly shaped its bones. The tower became a place of both art and atrocity, where the crown's enemies were imprisoned, and some never left. One of the most infamous prisoners was Anne Boleyn, but the real horror began with the White Tower's blood-stained staircase. But it wasn't just the physical climb that made the staircase dangerous, it was the stories of those who had fallen. Some say the blood of the executed seeped into the stone, and the air still carries the scent of iron and despair. As the years passed, the tower became a place where the line between king and criminal blurred. The blood-stained staircase was more than a structure, it was a witness to betrayal, love, and the cruelty of power. And it still watches, still waits. You remember how the tower was built to keep people out? Well, it seems like something was trying to keep people in, too. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older than the stones themselves. The first time the guards noticed it, they thought it was a trick of the light. But no, the red wasn't just paint. It clung to the stone like a stain from a long-ago crime, and it wasn't fading. They tried to scrub it, but the stain would return, deeper, more vivid. The blood seemed to shift under their eyes, like it was alive, like it was remembering something the world had forgotten. The older guards whispered about the White Knight, the one who had died in the 14th century. They said the stain was his mark, his curse, and that he hadn't been the only one who had bled on those steps. And then the whispers turned to warnings. The stain wasn't just a stain. It was a message, a warning, and if you didn't listen, it would find you too. You followed the whispers through the stone corridors, past the Bloody Tower's grim history. Now, imagine standing on the creaking stairs that lead to the highest chamber where the air feels heavier, the silence deeper, and the past seems to breathe with you. One evening in 1548, a young woman named Catherine Gray vanished without a sound. Her footsteps were last heard echoing up these stairs, her last known location, her final trace of humanity. Some say she was taken by the tower itself, a victim of its hunger for secrets. Others whisper that she was silenced by a hand she trusted, her fate sealed before she even reached the top of those stairs. And to this day, the staircase still hums with her absence. You can almost hear it like a heartbeat, like a sigh, like the echo of a voice that never made it to the top. I've spoken to several elderly locals who swear they've seen the staircase at night. One man said it was like watching a ghost climb, step by step, without a sound. Another woman said she heard footsteps on the stairs, but when she turned, there was no one there, just the echo of a woman's laughter, cold and hollow. There are rumors of a child's voice calling from the top of the stairs, echoing through the stone halls, sometimes in the dead of night, sometimes in the middle of the day. Some say the staircase is cursed, that it was built on the bones of a royal who never died, and that its steps remember every soul who has ever walked them. If you ever find yourself alone in the tower, don't look up. The staircase remembers, and it will find you. The investigation began in the dead of winter with a team of historians and local guides. We wandered the stone corridors, whispering names of the dead, hoping to stir something in the silence. We found old records, faded and brittle, detailing the execution of Anne Boleyn. The names of the guards, the time, the exact location of the staircase, everything was there, but nothing about the blood. One night, we brought a candle to the staircase. The flame flickered as if disturbed by an unseen wind, and the stone beneath our feet seemed to hum with a distant, mournful sound. We found a hidden compartment beneath the third step, sealed with a rusted iron lock. Inside was a small, weathered locket with a portrait of Anne Boleyn and a single, dried rose. The locket was cold to the touch, but the rose was warm, like it had been held close to a heart still beating. We left it there with a note. We heard your story. You know, there's one thing that has never been explained, a detail so small, so quiet, that it slipped through the cracks of history. It's like a whisper in the wind, a shadow on the wall. It's not the murder, not the blood, not even the ghost. It's something else entirely. Something that defies reason, that lingers in the silence between the screens. No one knows what it means. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a mark of the accused, but no one can say for sure. And that's the thing that haunts it all. It's not the bloodstained staircase that haunts us. It's the mystery that follows it, the silence that lingers, and the one detail that has never been explained. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard the rumors, but let me tell you what the locals really whisper. They say the bloodstained staircase isn't just haunted, it's cursed. Some say it's not the blood that lingers, but the grief. There's a theory that the blood belongs to a woman who was betrayed by her own kin. Others say it's the tears of a child who died in the arms of a king, but no one can agree on the truth. Some locals claim the staircase leads to a hidden chamber where the real history of the tower is kept, where the secrets of the crown and the blood of the crown are buried. And then there are the ones who say the blood-stained staircase isn't just a place, it's a warning. A reminder that even in the most fortified walls, history can be as cruel as it is beautiful. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they cling to the walls like ivy, whispering in the dark. The tower's blood-stained staircase is one of those. It's not just the history that lingers, it's the unanswered questions. Was it the executioners who left their mark, or something else? The bloodstains, they say, still shimmer in the moonlight, but no one can say for sure if they're real or imagined. Some claim to hear the echo of a child's laughter or the sound of a footfall that never belonged. Others say the bloodstains are not from the past at all, but from something that still walks these halls. The tower is a place of history, yes, but also of secrets. And sometimes, the greatest secrets are the ones that never get solved. They just wait. So, dear listener, when you think of the tower, don't just think of the crown jewels or the bloody tower. Think of the silence. Think of the stories that still haven't found their voice. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that don't end with a scream or a shadow. They linger, like a whisper in the dark, waiting for the right moment to return. And though we've traveled far through time and tales, the blood-stained staircase still stands, silent and waiting for the next soul to step its way into the past. Now, let's take a moment to breathe and listen for the faintest echo of the past. After all, the next tale might just be waiting for you. Stay with me, and let's see what secrets the next chapter has in store. The past is never far, and neither are its stories. You ever feel like some places just hold their breath? The East Wing Hotel, back in the 1920s, was the kind of place that made people whisper. It wasn't just a hotel, it was a secret society, a place where the wealthy came to escape the world, and the world came to escape them. They called it the East Wing for a reason. It was the part of the hotel that no one ever left. The doors were locked from the inside, and the staff didn't know where the guests went. Some said they were playing hide and seek with time itself, others that they were trapped in a loop of their own making. But what really made the East Wing famous wasn't the mirrors or the locked doors, it was the whispers. People swore they heard voices in the hallways, laughter that didn't belong to anyone, and the sound of someone waiting. Waiting for what? For whom? No one ever knew. You ever wonder what happens to a place when it stops being used? The East Wing wasn't just abandoned, it was forgotten. Left to rot, left to drain. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, you can still hear it calling. Calling to the ones who never left. You ever heard of a hotel that wasn't just built on the edge of town, but on the edge of something else? The East Wing Hotel began in 1892 when a man named Henry Langley decided to build a place that would make the whole city feel like it was holding its breath. Henry wasn't just building a hotel, he was building a monument to his late wife, Clara, who had died in a mysterious fire years before. He said the hotel would be her resting place and that it would never be sold. Eleanor had her own reasons for wanting the hotel built. She had lost her own daughter in a tragic accident years earlier, and she believed the East Wing would be a place where the dead could be remembered and perhaps even heard. The building process was slow, and the workers whispered that the ground was haunted. But Henry was stubborn, and he insisted that the East Wing would rise, no matter what was beneath it. And so, with a mix of ambition, grief, and a touch of madness, the East Wing Hotel was built. But as the first guests arrived, they would soon learn that some places are never truly empty. You remember the way the East Wing Hotel used to smell, like old lace and faded perfume. But after the fire, the scent changed, something sharp, something metallic, like blood on a tile floor. One morning, the doorman found a single rose on his desk, petals crumpled and blackened, as if it had been burned from the inside out. No card, no note, just the flower, and the weight of something watching. Then there were the footsteps. Not the kind you hear when someone's walking through the lobby, but the kind that echo in the silence, like a ghost pacing the same floor you've never walked. Guests started leaving in the middle of the night, claiming they heard a voice calling their name. Not from the halls, but from the walls. Like the hotel itself was trying to say something, but not in words. And then, the first real report. A woman came to the front desk, trembling, eyes bloodshot, and said she saw a figure in the elevator. Not a guest, not a staff member, just a woman, standing there, smiling like she knew her. You've heard the whispers, but now you're standing in the East Wing, where the air smells like old perfume and dust. You follow the sound of a woman's laughter just out of reach, echoing through the empty halls. The laughter grows louder, drawing you toward a grand staircase that's been abandoned for decades. You step over a loose floorboard and hear a soft, deliberate knock on the wall, not the door. She doesn't move, just watches you with eyes that seem to know everything. You feel a chill rise from your spine, like she's waiting for you to say something, anything that will break the silence. Then, without a word, she turns and walks up the stairs, her footsteps fading into the silence. You're left standing there, wondering if she was ever real or just a memory that refused to fade. I've spoken with a few guests who swear the East Wing hums at midnight, like a bass line from a forgotten jazz band. One lady said it made her feel like the walls were breathing. Another claimed she saw a woman in a flapper dress standing by the grand staircase, smiling at her like she knew her name. The woman vanished when she tried to run toward her. The staff, of course, had their own stories, like the night the elevator stopped between floors and no one could get out. The doors opened to find a man in a tuxedo standing there, his face frozen in a smile. One night, a janitor swore he saw a figure in the ballroom, dancing alone to a music only he could hear. He said the music stopped when he turned his back, and the figure vanished into the mirrors. And then there's the maid who found a pair of gloves in the linen closet, perfectly folded, with a name stitched into the cuff. No one knew who it belonged to until the owner passed away, and the gloves were never found again. We started with the old blueprints, the ones tucked behind a dusty ledger in the hotel's archives. They showed a hidden passageway that led to the East Wing, and the caretaker, Mr. Hensley, had a sneaky way of keeping it sealed with a heavy iron door. The first thing we found was a faded map in the basement, marked with XS and initials that didn't match any of the hotel's original guests. It was like someone had been trying to leave a trail of breadcrumbs through time. One of the investigators, a young woman named Claire, reported hearing whispers in the hallway at night. She said they were in a language she didn't recognize, but they felt like they were trying to tell her something. Finally, we found a journal hidden in the wall near the East Wing's entrance. It belonged to a guest from 1947, and it ended mid-sentence like the writer had been interrupted by something she couldn't explain. You ever notice how some places hold secrets so tight, they refuse to let them out? The East Wing Hotel's mystery is like that, tight, silent, and just waiting. The staff used to whisper about a missing key. Not just any key, this one was supposed to open the basement door, the one they never used after the fire. But here's the thing, the key never left the building. It was found years later in the pocket of the hotel's oldest employee who never said a word about it. And now, every time someone goes into the East Wing, they swear they hear the clink of metal. But no one ever finds it, not even the ghosts. So, do you think it's still there? Or did the key just disappear with the hotel itself? They say the East Wing Hotel was built on the bones of a forgotten village, and that the floorboards still creak like the whispers of the dead. But some swear it's not the ghosts that haunt the place, it's the memories. Old Mrs. Delaney used to tell me that the hotel was once a sanatorium, and that the patients never left. Some say they were never patients at all but residents trapped in a cruel experiment of the mind. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There's a theory that the hotel was cursed by a mad architect who believed the building could hold the souls of those who died within it. He died in the construction, and now the walls still echo with his final scream. Some say the hotel is a gateway, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. Others say it's just a place where people go to forget, and the past finds them anyway. And if you're ever curious, don't ask for the room on the 3rd floor. They say the walls there don't just hold memories, they hold people. You've heard the stories, but none of them explain the one that's still missing. The one that never made it to the archives. They say the East Wing Hotel was built on a grave, but what if it was built on a secret? A truth that slipped through the cracks of time. Maybe the hotel isn't haunted by ghosts. Maybe it's haunted by the idea of what happened and the fear of what it might still be hiding. So, what do you think? Was it a secret, a mistake, or something far more unsettling? The hotel still stands, and the mystery isn't done with us yet. You've heard the whispers of the East Wing, but have you ever wondered what lies beyond the last echo? Sometimes, the most chilling stories are the ones that fade into silence. There's a quiet dignity to a haunted place that has outlived its time, like a grandmother who still holds court in a house that's forgotten her name. And if you're ever in the mood for a story that lingers in your bones long after the lights go out, I'll be right here, with a cup of tea and a story that won't let go. But for now, I'll leave you with the sound of the wind through the old windows, and the feeling that someone might still be listening. You've heard of the Philippines, but have you ever considered the Bataan Peninsula? It's a place where history and horror intertwine, like the shadows of 1,000 lost souls. You ever wonder what secrets lie beneath those quiet, overcast skies? Back in 1942, this place became infamous. It wasn't just a battlefield, it was a death march, a nightmare for thousands. You ever think about what it must have felt like to walk that path, knowing the end was already written? The Bataan Death March isn't just a name, it's a memory, a ghost that lingers in the silence of the land. You ever wonder how a place can hold so much pain, so much loss, and still remain so still? Some say the land remembers. Some say the wind carries whispers of the fallen. You ever think about how the earth holds stories that we can't hear, but feel like a quiet ache in the bones? This isn't just a story about war. It's a story about survival, about loss, about the weight of history. You ever think about what it takes for a place to become a legend, and what it means for it to be haunted? You know, the Bataan Death March wasn't just a march, it was a calculated act of cruelty. The Japanese army, under the command of General Masaharu Hama, decided that the Filipino and American prisoners would be forced to walk 60 miles through the scorching Philippine jungle, with no food, water, or medical care. The prisoners were men of all ranks, soldiers, officers, and even civilians. Many were wounded, and some had been shot or bayoneted by their own comrades to save them from capture. It was a brutal, dehumanizing act of war, wrapped in the guise of discipline and order. Hama believed that by making the prisoners march, he would break their will and prevent any future resistance. But what he didn't realize was that he was also breaking the bodies of men who had already endured too much. The march became a symbol of the Japanese military's ruthless efficiency and their disregard for human life. As the march began, the prisoners were told they would be taken to a place of recreation, a euphemism for a labor camp. But the reality was far worse. The path was littered with landmines, and the heat was so intense that many collapsed from exhaustion or heat stroke. The Japanese soldiers, many of whom were young and eager for glory, watched with cold detachment as their prisoners suffered. Some were beaten, some were shot, and many simply walked away, their hands stained with blood and dirt. This was not a march, it was a massacre. You know how sometimes the wind carries a whisper, like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear? Well, out here, the wind has been carrying a different kind of story, one that's been waiting to be told for decades. The first sign people noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after a storm, but the kind that wraps around you like a shroud, making you feel like you're the only one left in the world. Then came the stories, whispers of a place where the air doesn't breathe and the sun doesn't touch the ground. People said the wind would change direction and the trees would sway without a breeze. Some said the wind was carrying voices not from the living, but from the dead. Others claimed it was just the wind, but no one could explain why it seemed to come from the hill, as if it were calling them back to a place they'd never been. You can almost hear it now, the wind's voice, like it's saying, you're not alone here. And maybe, just maybe, it's not just the wind at all. You ever wonder what happens when the world turns its back on a people? When the silence is louder than the screams? The Bataan Death March wasn't just a march, it was a slaughter, and the silence of that day still echoes in the bones of the earth. They said they were marching for freedom, but freedom had long since left the soldiers and civilians who walked that path. Thousands of feet trudged through mud, but not all of them made it to the end. There are stories of men who tried to hide in the jungle, only to be found days later, their bodies bloated and bloated with salt water. Others were left to rot in the sand, their bones still whispering the names of those who walked beside them. The march was a lesson in despair, in the slow and methodical death of the human spirit. And though the world may have forgotten the names, the land remembers. The earth still holds their stories, waiting to be told. I remember hearing a story from a survivor, a man who spoke of the sun rising over Bataan like a cruel joke, casting long shadows over the bodies of the dead. He said the march was not just a walk, it was a procession of despair, with each step echoing with the weight of the impossible. One witness, a nurse who survived by hiding in the jungle, told me of a moment when the silence was louder than any scream, the kind of silence that comes before the end. She described the air as thick with the scent of earth and fear, as if the land itself held its breath in mourning. These are not just stories, they are echoes of a time when the world turned its back on the forgotten, and silence was the worst punishment of all. We followed the old maps, the faded trails, and the whispers of those who'd walked them before. The silence was so thick, you could almost hear the ghosts of the lost. Then we found the stones weathered, half-buried, arranged in a pattern that seemed too precise to be natural. It was like the earth itself was trying to tell us something. One of the locals, a retired teacher, shared his story about the well, how it was said to hold more than water. She spoke of a cold, clear pool that shimmered with an eerie light. We dug deeper, not just into the earth, but into the records. The official reports were sparse, but the personal letters, those were full of fear, sorrow, and a strange, unspoken truth. And then there were the dreams. Some of us started seeing the same vision, men in uniforms, walking through the jungle, their faces obscured, but their eyes full of something we couldn't name. The investigation didn't just uncover a massacre, it unearthed something far more unsettling, a truth buried not just in the earth, but in the hearts of those who lived to remember. You ever wonder what happens when the truth refuses to be found? There's one detail about Bataan that has never been explained: why the bodies were never found. Not even one. It's not like they were buried and forgotten. They were just gone. No bones, no markers, no whispers of where they might lie. Some say the earth swallowed them whole, or that the jungle devoured them. Others say it was the war itself, the chaos, the madness, that left no room for a body to be found. But why? Why would a massacre leave no trace? Why would history forget them, even as it remembers the war? Maybe the truth is not in the ground, but in the silence. In the way the wind never stops and the trees never speak. You've heard the names, but some say the true story lies in the whispers of the local elders, stories passed down like heirlooms, wrapped in layers of memory and mystery. Some say the ghosts of the march aren't just soldiers, but the spirits of the women and children who were never meant to be there, caught in the crossfire of war. Theories swirl like smoke in the air. Some say the march was a cover. Others believe the true horror was never fully told, and that the stories are just the beginning. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And some say the worst is still to come, because even the dead can't escape the weight of a truth that's been buried for too long. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.